Welcome to Shared Success, the Employee Ownership podcast, where we explore real stories of business owners using shared ownership to strengthen their companies, their communities, and their legacies. I'm your host, Marie Davis with the Georgia Center for Employee Ownership. Today, we're joined by Brennan McGoldrick, founder of Scout Brokerage, right in Athens, Georgia. In this episode, we explore Brennan's unique journey from owning a veterinary practice to building a brokerage firm that helps business owners navigate the sale of their businesses with care and integrity. We'll talk about what inspired him to make a more values-driven model in the mergers and acquisitions space, what business owners need to consider when thinking about employee ownership as a succession option, and how empathy and clarity can better shape outcomes for everyone involved. Whether you're a business owner thinking about what's next, service provider supporting founders through transition, or simply curious about how deals can be done differently, this conversation will give you plenty to consider. The Georgia Center for Employee Ownership is launching a podcast to celebrate the ARPA funds we received to promote employee ownership and succession planning in and around Athens. And today, our great first guest with Scout Brokerage is Brennan McGoldrick, who is, of course, in Athens, but serves all over the country, as the Georgia Center serves all of Georgia. So thank you, Brennan, for being our guinea pig as our first podcast event.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate you having me. That's a lot of pressure. I didn't realize I was the first. I will try to set a high bar for the next guest. How about that?
You'll be great. And so, Brennan, you've just got the most amazing story of how you moved in to start your business. So will you talk about your background, your journey from veterinary medicine into the world of Scout Brokerage?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's certainly a bit of a winding road that I took, and maybe some people thought I was a little bit nuts for taking it. But I grew up, always wanted to be a vet. I think there's a lot of kids out there and a lot of adults even who say, "Hey, this is something I've always wanted to do." And so really kind of forged ahead, undergrad, vet school, obviously focused on one goal to become veterinarian. And I did that, kind of accomplished my hopes and dreams, and practiced veterinary medicine for about 11 years before I decided that maybe there was something else that I should try in life. So backing up a little bit, I was in practice for a long time working for other people, and I decided that I wanted to own my own practice. That model is maybe going away in the veterinary world a little bit, but at the time was still kind of the thing everyone did. So I wanted to own a practice, but I also didn't know anything about owning a business. And so I went back to school to get a business degree, an MBA, at around the same time that I purchased a practice. And so purchased a practice, worked really hard, grew that practice just out of hard work with the help of a partner. And, the veterinary industry is such an interesting industry that there's been a lot of investment in the industry, a lot of buyouts happening of private practitioners. I was starting to feel a little bit of burnout. I think after a decade in the industry, that's pretty common. We see a lot of veterinarians experience burnout. And I was in sort of a unique situation that I owned a practice in a small town, but I had three veterinary specific business brokers who lived in my town and brought their pets to me. So they were always talking about, hey, you should sell your business, sell your business. I was in my mid 30s, sounds a little bit crazy. But I think when you combine the access I had to a business broker and a little bit of burnout, it kind of all worked out. And I sold the business in my mid 30s. Everyone thought I was nuts. My partner was gracious enough to go along with that plan. But I was kind of looking for my next phase in life. I had three college degrees at that point, really no plan. And one of the business brokers I was referencing, and actually the one who introduced me to my buyer, said, "Hey, look, you know the vet space, business. Why don't you try to work and help other vets?" And so started just helping vets first sell their businesses, some to individuals, a lot to private equity, and then over the course of time said, "Hey, maybe there's even more to do. Maybe I can step out of this industry. Maybe I can do other things." So a couple of years ago, kind of broke out on my own and started working not only in the vet industry, but work kind of generalist, is what we would call it, working with most types of businesses, understanding that the fundamentals of business are basically the same. how much money you make generally determines your business's value. So, yeah, that's how I got where I am today. It's a bit complex, but maybe I've recognized over myself or with myself that maybe over like 7 to 10 years, I just get bored with things. So who knows where I'll be 10 years from now? But that's my story.
I think that is a great inspiration to all business owners is that just because you've done one thing that you can't move on and do something else more exciting. And I think Athens is just the perfect place to tell that story because you've got the university there and there's so many opportunities to get that other degree or move on, and a great SBDC there where you can go and get some assistance to start a business. And so I know that you and I talked about how Scout Brokerage is just really a different model and you built it that way on purpose. What made you want to build it in a different way?
Yeah, we try to do things differently, and I think business brokerage or business brokers in general, M&A advisors, business intermediaries, whatever you want to call them, at a high level investment bankers, I think have a bit of a reputation for being, a little bit sleazy, a little bit commission driven. Part of what I do is when we sell a business, occasionally sell real estate. And I was doing some continuing education last week for one of my real estate licenses and was reading about how real estate agents are, generally some of the least trusted professionals anywhere. And I think business brokers are right up there, if not above real estate agents. It doesn't mean that they're all bad people, but I think the perception is that they are just commission chasers, or we are just commission chasers, don't necessarily have our clients' best interests at heart. And so, I ran into a couple situations, not with the people I was working with necessarily, but with other business brokers that I was sort of on the other side of the table with. And, some really unethical things, just really, sleazy things is probably the best way to put it. Where I thought, you know what, like there just has to be a better way to do this. And I think I told you before we were having coffee one day that I likened this to the movie Jerry Maguire, which is probably my favorite movie. I'm kind of a low key Tom Cruise fan. And, Jerry Maguire starts really with this guy who works at a sports agency, excuse me, saying, hey, there's a better way to do this. And he grabs his fish and he says he's going to write a mission statement and he walks out. And again, in my case, not necessarily a reflection of where I worked, but just I think this can be done better. I think this can be done more ethically. And there are things that I wanted to do that I couldn't do if I worked for someone else. For example, I like to travel to meet people. If you call me with a business for sale in North Dakota, my first thing is probably to say, hey, can I come meet you in North Dakota to get to know you?
Right.
Because as much as, Zooms or recorded sessions are good, really, there's no substitute in my mind for an in-person meeting. Other things that we do that are a little bit different is that we take on significant expenses for people in order to do this correctly. And what I mean by that, for example, we spoke to a client about a week ago who has a really unique business, one that's really unique in terms of valuation, not the standard valuation models that many people use. And I said, look, if I'm going to sell this and sell it for you at the right price and do it quickly and do it ethically and do it well, I need to hire someone to tell me what it's worth. And that's going to cost me $20,000 or $30,000, and that's a lot of money. And I don't mean to minimize it, but to say, hey, I'm in charge. If I want to take that step and I want to make that investment, hoping there's a return down the road, then I can do that and don't have to ask permission. And I think most people like to work for themselves. I certainly enjoy it. But I thought there was just a better way to do things, and so here we are trying to do it a different way.
I love that. And I know that when we first started talking about having you on the program, I know you're not opposed to employee ownership at all. And a lot of people on this program, hopefully, there are a lot of people listening that do not know anything about employee ownership. So let's just talk about your former vet practice. In an employee ownership model, if you had involved the employees or used the employee ownership model, how different would that have been for you, where everybody has a stake in the success of the business?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the veterinary industry is a really great example of that because probably more so than any other industry or any other industry where I've worked, there is such a unique bond in a private practice between the owners, the owner veterinarian, typically the staff, the clients, the patients. It is so unique how closely tied everyone is, especially if you go in a small town. People love their vet, or they have this relationship with their vet, and they remember the good times where their vet maybe saved their pet. They remember the sad times where they lost a pet. There's such a unique tie. And when there is a transition in ownership, especially in that industry, it is, I mean, truly a shockwave through those practices. And I think, we sold our practice. I mean, it's been, gosh, 8 years ago now. I remember the day I sat down and told my staff, hey, we're selling this practice to a company whose money comes out of Chicago, right? And their first question is like, oh, hey, are we going to still get like kind of the hometown feel? Well, I don't know. It's tough to promise that. And I think if there were an option to sell to employees, which now there is, I think a lot of people in that industry specifically would love to look into that. I think it kind of brings in the question of valuation, and we can certainly talk about that here today. You know, when you have such aggressive buyers in that industry in particular who are paying such aggressive prices, who are the owners who are going to say, I will turn that down and maybe take less value to sell to my staff? I think certainly from a cultural perspective, selling to employees, it would be very welcome in that industry. I know of a couple of people who have tried to do some co-op situations because they were just, the veterinarians themselves don't love the corporate takeover, if you will, until they're getting a check. And then suddenly it's not so bad, right? So, I think that's really kind of the big quandary is, hey, culturally, we would love to sell to our employees. We would like to keep this business locally owned, but can we do that from a valuation perspective? And that's really the big challenge in that industry in particular. Maybe not in some others, but sure, if I could sell my practice and say, hey, employees, this is all going to you, and eventually I'll step away. That would have been a very different transition, a much easier transition, in my opinion. Probably a lot less angst on my part and on their part. So yeah, it certainly would have been a nice option to have, all things being equal, and it would have been great.
Yeah, and so I think we almost titled this "Push Me, Pull Me" because it would seem like why would I have somebody that buys and sells businesses when we're talking about employee ownership? And I think it's great that we can talk about all the different options. This is one of the reasons why we were invited to work in Athens, is that most business owners, as you can say, people you've worked with, don't have a plan. And I don't call it succession planning, I call it strategic planning. And so if they don't have the knowledge of the different options, like Scout Brokerage is not, necessarily going to scalp you, and they might send you to us if you're interested in a different model. We're going to send somebody to you if employee ownership, if they just say, no, I don't care about my employees, I want my money right now, or
Yeah.
it's not right for me. We are there to help business owners make that decision, not make the decision for them, but give them all these different options. And so, like you said, if business owners know like what an ownership trust is, or the co-op model, they can make a better informed decision, and we can connect them with people like you, like service providers who do employee ownership work, and let the business owners have these discussions. And as you said, a lot of people really think that when it's employee owned, employees make the decision. That's not correct at all. The owner can still be involved as long as they want to be involved. They can put 10% of the business in the ESOP, 100%. Of course, the tax options are better if they do 100%. But the point is it's pretty, even though it's, managed by the labor department, it's pretty malleable. So we just want employee owners to have the options. And it could be that they are willing to take, it's not necessarily less money, because with the tax options, it could be more. Just explore what there is out there, because it's awfully tempting to just say, I'm done. I don't care about my legacy. We're going to move this business out of Athens, and all these people lose their job because there's, another company that's going to, mirror what you already have. We don't want that to happen, but if it's the right thing for them, we want them to make that decision. And I know that Scout Brokerage, like you said, is a different model, and people should be excited to know that somebody's in their community that can do that.
A couple of things that I would say to that is, one thing that I always talk to people about, like when we first sit down and have our first meeting and kind of learn about the business, the first question that I usually ask people is, what are your priorities here? Like, is it speed? Like, do you just want to sell as quickly as possible? Is it valuation? Do you just want as much as you can get? Is it that you can retire right away? Is it that you can stay on and work for a while? Is it what's going to happen to your employees? And most people have some combination of I want the most I can get as fast as I can get it, and I want to go sit on the beach somewhere. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for those people who say my priority are my priority is my employees, I think that employee ownership makes a lot of sense. I think also, as you talk about how me or people in my industry kind of play a role, um, eh, eh, you know, in this process, I think you've got to be a little bit cautious with people who are earning a fee based on the sale of a business and say, okay, all right, let's say I'm Brennan and I'm representing this company and I'm getting a fee based on the sale and it's a commission fee. I think I would be comfortable telling someone, hey, look, you could probably, sell it for a little bit less, but let's explore employee ownership. I see the benefits to that. I do think you'll run across some folks in my industry who wouldn't even mention it to their clients because it would affect what they would get paid down the road. And so I think people should be proactive and talking. If they hire someone, doesn't have to be me, but if they hire someone who is representing them, whether that's here in Athens or somewhere on the other side of the country, hey, what do you know about employee ownership? Should I look into that? Are you open to walking me through that process? Because I do think that, they're like we talked about, treating people ethically. Sometimes that means we take a lower fee because we found a better cultural fit, right? And I just think, it's important for people who are listening to know, like if I'm hiring someone, I need to know that they're on board with at least looking into this option, because if not, I doubt they would lead you down that road on their own. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And so, how often does the conversation of legacy come into it?
I hear a lot more talk, to be candid with you, about valuation. And maybe that's just because it's kind of, an important first step. Does my business have any value? If so, what is it worth? I don't get as many people worried about legacy as I do valuation. I think that's probably one of the challenges that you face. And my guess is that you would say yes to that, that a lot of people are sort of chasing valuation. And I want to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you've worked your whole life to build something and you want to chase the highest exit, congratulations. I think that's wonderful. But I do think most people I talk to, not all, but most, care a lot about their employees, especially those loyal employees they've had for 2 decades, and they want to see them cared for, whether that is in the form of some sort of cash bonus, some sort of share of a sales price, or I do think, and I'm glad to see this sort of ramp up and talk about employee ownership, because I think it's great. And look, I think from my side, selfishly, could make things a little easier, right? You don't have to go through that hunt for buyers. You don't have to go through that really anxious transition phase where you sit your staff down and you tell them, hey, I've sold you to somebody you've never met and may never meet. And there are a lot of benefits in my mind to employee ownership. And yeah, maybe it's a lower price up front or less cash up front or whatever. And I don't mean to say that all deals are like that. But I think selfishly it makes a lot of sense for people in my position.
And also, to your point, a lot of businesses, employee owned businesses, buy other businesses all the time. So there's still, room for brokers to make a profit because employee owned companies have a lot of cash typically, and they want to take other businesses into their stock plan to strengthen it. So, and a lot of them leave the legacy there, they leave the name there, but of course that's a whole different ball game. But let me ask you this, what advice would you give to, especially thinking about the Athens community, because that's what this is to serve, to give to the brokers and advisors and businesses owners who want to explore what to do with their company and may feel overwhelmed, uninformed, or just not sure where to start?
I think it's always good for anyone to start having conversations about an exit or succession plan, um, well before you are prepared to do that, right? And look, it's great if someone called me today and said, "Hey, I want to sell my business tomorrow. I can sell it in a week." Like, yeah, of course, that's simple and easy, but that is not at least my expectation, and my guess is other brokers are the same way. Is look, you should be having conversations about value, about a plan, about potential buyers, you know, at least months, if not years, before you're ready to pull the trigger on that. I think the people who wait until there is some urgent reason to sell a business find themselves really disadvantaged in the process. So I think, if people say, hey, you know, I'm thinking about selling to my employees. What does that look like? Maybe I'll sell to private equity. What does that look like? Maybe I'll just sell to another Athens resident. What does that look like? How would they get the money? Those are conversations that people should feel comfortable having. And that's, what we spend a lot of time doing, and probably shouldn't advertise this publicly. You give a lot of free advice, right? Because it's important to position the business well, identify, like we talked about, what are a business owner's priorities, and then figure out how to get there. And it may be like, hey, now's the time. You better go now, and you better do this, that, and the other. Or it's, hey, now's not the time. If you want to sell to
Exactly.
private equity, you've got to do this. And if you want to sell to your employees, we need to start identifying who the leaders are that are going to, help acquire this company. Can't just have, three employees that, turn over every month and say, I want to sell to my employees. Like that's different. So I think it's important for anybody to just start engaging in conversation. And at least for me, engaging in conversation doesn't cost anybody any money. I don't know or really follow how other people operate, but I think those conversations are important to have. Don't wait until you get, you know, sick, or a family member, passes away, or you realize you have to relocate or something, to say, okay, now I've got to sell, because your options are really limited when you don't have time to work on it.
So I want to give kudos to an Athens company, Joma Construction, that they're 100% employee owned, and they've done this. I think they're in their second or third year now. I believe it's second. And so John Newland, who was their founder, is very young. And so now he's got all these years. All he wants is to watch this company grow. And at some point down the road, they may sell the company. That trustee would make that decision. But right now, as a young man, he's getting to watch all these wonderful things happen. So I also want to say thank you to you, Brennan, for being on our task force in Athens. And I think partnerships are absolutely key. We tried to find people who aren't just employee, our first meeting, and you'll attest to this, most people didn't know anything about employee ownership. We're there to find out what Athens needs and how to find that. And we want them to be able to find you at Scout Brokerage and to find the Georgia Center for Employee Ownership. We've just hired a local coordinator, Mr. Matthew Epperson, who's very well known there in the Athens community, just to serve Athens. And so, Brennan, be sure to tell us how to find you.
Yeah, certainly people can reach me, through our website, which is scoutbusiness.com. You can email me at Brennan, Brennan at scoutbusiness.com. I'm happy to give out my phone number if that's acceptable. I think people could reach out anytime. 706-614-8846 is my number. But, I think Athens, if you sort of just step back at a high level and look at Athens, I think it sort of screams employee ownership, right? I mean, there is this kind of deep cultural connection for people who have lived in Athens for a long time, who feel very tied, whether that's because they were in school in Athens and love Athens, or they visit Athens all the time. Whatever it is, I do think Athens just feels like its own little place that's maybe separate from, all the money that flows through Atlanta or Charlotte or something like that. So, I love the idea of it. I think people need to consider it, need to take it to heart that this is real. And look, as someone who is an entrepreneur and loves entrepreneurship, what I love about employee ownership is just the potential it gives for people who, well, I mean, let's be candid, there's a lot of people out there who would never have the opportunity to own even a piece of a business. And I think the potential it gives those people is just incredible in terms of the potential for growth and to build long-term equity in something, and frankly rewards the employees for hard work. So, I love the idea, and I think Athens is really the perfect place for it.
And what probably a lot of people don't know, we're sitting here saying own a business, that the company puts the money into their ownership shares. So those lucky people at Joma have not paid a penny for their retirement, what they own in the company. What they've done is come to work every day and do a great job and have the ownership mindset. And so that's a great thing. So we're on, although we're really kind of on opposite sides of the table, we're not really. And I just love the fact that you were willing to come on here and talk about your business and why it is different. So thank you.
Yeah,
Tremendously.
appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you having me. I'll add just to that last point that you made. I think it's really important for people to understand what you just said, because I think a lot of reactions would maybe say, hey, I can't, my employees can't afford to buy this company. It doesn't necessarily have to come out of their pocket, right? A lot of models out there, just like you talked about, where the company sort of pays for itself. And so without going in the weeds, I think that's an important point to make. But no, I love what you're doing at the Center for Employee Ownership. I'm happy you guys are making a push in the Athens area, and certainly would love to help in any way that I can. So I'm happy to be here, and I would love to come back anytime.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marie.
Whether you're a business owner thinking about the future, service provider looking to support your clients, or just curious about how employee ownership really works, this podcast is for you. Join us for conversations that inspire, inform, and show what's possible when ownership is shared. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And visit us at gaceo.org.